Today I'm ranking the albums by Exodus. I will be just ranking the 12 studio albums in a worst to best format, and I will be including the new album Goliath. With that being said, let me get into it. Coming in number 12 is Is Imminent. This is the fourth studio album released on July 10th, 1990. This was the first album on Capitol Records, as well as the first album to feature John Tempesta on drums. It's also the last studio album to feature Rob McKillop on bass, not counting their first live album, Good Friendly Violent Fun, recorded in '89 but released in '91. I bought this one when it was released in 1990, and I never liked it. For some reason, I felt it was a big step down from Fabulous Disaster. One big issue is the production. The guitars sound muddy, which in turn blurs the riffs and reduces clarity. The drums are thin, especially the snare, and the bass tends to get buried, making the rhythm section feel flat. In addition, many tracks are bland, predictable, and lack the hooks and progression that made albums like Bonded by Blood a classic. Furthermore, many riffs sound overly familiar or borderline derivative, and even sound like earlier Exodus material or other thrash bands like Overkill. Finally, Steve Zetros House's vocals and lyrics are weaker or sillier than on previous records, with choruses and phrasing that can sound cheesy for some listeners. On a positive note, the album contains a handful of songs that can be considered classics, including the title track, Impact is Imminent, the closer, Thrash Under Pressure, and Heads They Win, Tails You Lose. But despite this, it comes in at number 12. Coming in number 11 is Force of Habit, the fifth studio album, released August 25th, 1992 by Capitol Records. A lot of people don't like this album, given it was a departure from the band's previous albums with some slower songs and more of a groove metal style. I don't mind this album, but it has a few problems. First of all, I don't like the two covers, which are Bitch by the Rolling Stones and Pump It Up by Elvis Costello. Those could have been removed or saved for B-sides. The album was also missing the all-out speed and violence typical of the Bay Area thrash scene, which led many to label it as a failed attempt to mimic the commercial success of Metallica's Black Album. In addition, the album is too long. It's nearly 69 minutes, and the only Exodus studio album that does not feature the band's traditional iconic logo, which in my opinion is one of the coolest logos out of any of the thrash bands. Even the band members have expressed regret over the record. Guitarist Gary Holt has stated in interviews that Force of Habit is his least favorite Exodus album. But with that being said, the album has a few hidden gems. Architect of Pain is probably the band's most ambitious song. It's an 11-minute epic doom metal journey with melodic leads, spoken word narration, and a haunting, slow-burning atmosphere. There's also Feeding Time at the Zoo, which is the thrashiest song on the album. It's fast, meat and potatoes, thrash metal. It's a classic, and it goes back to the band's high-energy roots. And finally, One Foot in the Grave. It's a heavy, down-tempo chugger and a crushing song overall. For the above reasons, I will rank it at number 11. Coming in number 10 is Blood In, Blood Out, the 11th studio album released on October 14th, 2014 through Nuclear Blast. First album with vocalist Steve Zetros Salsa since 2004's Temple of the Damned. The album also saw a reunion with original guitarist Kirk Hammett, who plays guitar solo on Salt the Wound. I felt this one had a classic Exodus sound from the late 80s album. Sounded like a natural sequel to Temple of the Damned, with the Rob Dukes albums existing in a different timeline, if that makes sense. One thing I like about this album is it keeps the classic aggression, but tightens the production and pacing. The album is filled with fast, palm-muted, no-nonsense thrash riffs with some groove. Songwriting is riff-driven and immediate with short, punchy tracks. Guitars are thick, chunky, and very modern-sounding. Riffs are fast, galloping tempos with occasional slower, almost groove metal elements, giving the album a mix of aggression and weight. Tom Hunting's drums are heavy with tight double bass work that drives the songs forward without feeling overprocessed. The bass is clearly audible and adds a lot of low-end Steve Zetros Salsa returns with a more controlled, varied delivery, a mix of snarling thrash and high-pitched shrieks and occasional gang-style chants, and a very live and rowdy feel. The overall vibe is aggressive, but less raw and chaotic than older Exodus records. The title track is one of the most cited songs. It's fast, direct, very in-your-face with memorable gang-style shouts and a solid thrash hook that sums up the album's attitude. Wrapped in the Arms of Rage and My Last Nerve are also standouts for their hooky choruses and crushing grooves. Overall, I know I said a lot of good stuff about it, but It's good, but it's decent, and for that reason, it's at number 10. Coming in number 9 is the new album, Goliath, and I know a lot of people are going to come at me for this one, putting it over Blood In and Blood Out, but I have my reasons, so let's talk about them. This is their 13th studio album, released on March 20, 2026. First studio album to feature vocalist Rob Dukes since Exhibit B, The Human Condition, and the band's first album to be released through Napalm Records, with whom the band signed in 2023. A lot of people don't like this album. I'm still getting comments on my review, how people say it's one of their worst and how the production is really bad. I went back and listened to it again, and I'm sorry, but I don't hear it. If anything, maybe the drums are a little thin, but otherwise, the production is not anything to complain about. As for the songs, yeah, it's a little experimental. We have the song Goliath. It's a slow song, but is it a bad song? In my opinion, I don't think so. I thought it was really good. I like it. Then there's Beyond the Event Horizon. That's probably one of the best songs they have released in a long time. I don't know why people hate that one, but anyway, I'm not going to talk too much about this. I did a full review, and people are still talking about it, so I'm just going to rank it here, and this is where it sits, and that's where it's going to be. Coming in number 8 is Exhibit B, The Human Condition, the 10th studio album released on May 7, 2010 in Europe, and on May 18, 2010 in the US. Also the first studio album since 1989's Fabulous Disaster that they didn't feature a lineup change from the preceding album, and also one of the band's longest albums in their discography at 1 hour and 14 minutes, which means there's a little bit of filler, and that's going to bring the album down a little bit. Key tracks that define the album include Downfalls, starts with a melodic, moody guitar intro before exploding into technical thrash. There's also a ballad of Leonard and Charles, possibly the most well-known track on the record, telling the story of serial killers Leonard Lake and Charles Ng, and features this really cool, haunting acoustic intro and some of the heaviest, most swinging riffs that Gary Holt has ever written. There's also Class Dismissed, a controversial and brutal track focusing on school shootings. It's known for its blunt force, rhythmic delivery, and Rob Dukes' most venomous vocal performance. Burn Hollywood Burn is a high-speed, vicious critique of celebrity culture, and stands out as one of the faster, more straightforward thrashers on an otherwise more progressive album. Hammer and Life, which has more of that classic old school thrash vibe compared to the technical density of the rest of the album. And finally, The Sun Is My Destroyer, a crushing 9-minute closer featuring guest vocals from Peter Tägtgren from Hypocrisy and Pain, and he was also on Goliath, but I didn't mention that. But overall, very good album. I think the length brings it down a bit, but still good enough to rank at number 8. Basically, everything after this is a really good album. Coming in number 7 is Persona Non Grata, 12th studio album released on November 19, 2021. And last was Steve Zetro Salsa before leaving in 2025. The album also features guest appearances from former Exodus guitarist Rick Hunolt and guitarist Lee Outlaw's bandmate in Heathen, Craig and Loom, who both provide guitar solos on one of the album's track, Lunatic Liar Lord. This is also the band's final album to be released through Nuclear Blast, with whom the band signed in 2003. I gave this one a listen again, not hearing it for a while, and I was actually surprised how good it was. I especially liked Zetro's vocals. I felt he was expanding his range, not just doing those typical Goblin-style vocals. The overall sound was very tight, aggressive, hyper-focused. They maintained the band's classic 80s sound, but with a slick and modern production. The album is fast and punchy, lots of extreme paced tempos, machine-type drums, a massive rhythm section, guitars are sharp, they sound like a chainsaw, and it was also produced and mixed by Andy Sneap, so the sound is clean, crisp, it has a modern thrash sound. Every instrument is clearly separated, yet still brutal and in your face. Gary Holt and Lee Outlaw's deliver a relentless twin guitar attack. Songs are filled with lots of riffs, galloping thrash rhythms, and squealing leads. Despite the overall speed, the album includes a mid-paced song like REMF and a couple others, and I like them, but some people might not. But some of these go into Force of Habit territory, but that's not a problem for me. The album has some real bangers, such as Prescribing Horror and The Punky, The Beatings Will Continue. For the above reasons, I rank it at number 7. Coming in number 6 is Shovel-Headed Kill Machine, the 7th studio album released on October 4th, 2005 through Nuclear Blast. First album featured new vocalist Rob Dukes after the departure of Steve Zetro Salsa. Also the band's first studio album not to feature Rick Hunolt on guitars with Lee Outlaw's as his replacement. and the only Exodus album to feature Paul Bostaph on drums after Tom Hunting's second departure as a result of the recurrence of the illness that prompted him to depart in '89. I'll be honest with you all, I only knew a few tracks from this album as I never listened to it in full before. The album shows the band moving towards a more brutal, modern, and aggressive thrash metal sound. Rob Dukes delivers a more visceral, hardcore-influenced, barking-style vocal delivery. The album was also produced by Andy Sneap, so the production has a dense, mid-range, heavy mix. The guitar and bass tones are heavy as fuck. Gary Holt used an ENGL Savage 120 amplifier for this recording, and this resulted in a signature tone characterized by intense low-mid heaviness and a sharp, clicky high-end attack. As a result, riffs are faster and more precision, focused on previous efforts. Paul Bostaph delivers a more frantic and relentless rhythmic foundation compared to the band's typical groove. The overall vibe is darker and more angry than earlier records, with a heavy lyrical focus on war, crime, and just bloody mayhem. Some key tracks include Altered Boy, which is a critique of the Catholic Church. It also includes a title track in the album Closer, which guitarist Gary Holt has called one of the fastest songs Exodus has ever written. Overall, a solid album, coming in at number 6. Coming in at number 5 is Temple of the Damned, 6th studio album, released on February 2nd, 2004, via Nuclear Blast. This was a comeback album of sorts. It's the first studio release since 1992's Force of Habit. Also the last appearance of longtime vocalist Steve Zetro Salsa until his return in 2014, and last appearance of founding drummer Tom Hunting until 2007's The Atrocity Exhibition, Exhibit A. The album was also the last studio appearance of guitarist Rick Hunolt until the 2021 album, Persona Non Grata, where he just made a guest appearance. And also the first Exodus studio album to accredit founding guitarist Kirk Hammett for a song which was Impaler. And I've always liked this album. I discovered this one about 10 years after its release, but it's always been one of my favorites from the modern era. This one has what is probably their most popular song on streaming services, which is Blacklist. The song has a crushing mid-tempo groove and catchy lyrics about revenge. It's probably one of their most catchiest songs. There's also Scar Spangled Banner, the opening track, which has some of their signature speed and sharp political commentary. Song titles are also clever puns, such as War's My Shepherd and Sealed with a Fist. And going back to the song Impaler that credits Kirk Hammett, here's some cool trivia. The song was written early in the band's career and co-credited to Kirk Hammett. And the track was reworked for the album and features a riff reused by Kirk on Metallica's Trapped Under Ice. But overall, I've always thought it was a great album, coming in at number 5. Coming in at number 4 is Pleasures of the Flesh, second studio album released in 1987, and the group's first to feature Steve Salsa on vocals after Paul Bailoff left the band. I'll be honest with you, I didn't buy this album back in the day. I only listened to it for the first time only recently. I think this one is overlooked. It gets overshadowed by both the debut and Fabulous Disaster, which I will talk about later. Pleasures of the Flesh is an album that features improved songwriting and darker themes. It expanded the thrash boundaries. The album is filled with razor-sharp riffs from Gary Holt and Rick Hunolt. And this time they're able to balance aggression with melody, so it doesn't sound like Bonded by Blood Part 2. Tracks like Parasite and Brain Dead have heavy, chugging guitars as well as harmonic lead guitar work. Steve Salsa delivers his vocals with power and charisma, so he was better suited for the varied tempos. The album also includes anthems like Deranged and Faster You'll Ever Live to Be, which combine heaviness with catchiness. The album also sounds fuller than the debut without being too polished. And there's some awesome bass grooves from Rob McKillop. Finally, this album is a near-perfect sequel and underappreciated gem. So for that reason, I have it ranked at number 4. Coming in number 3 is The Atrocity Exhibition, Exhibit A, 8th studio album released on October 26, 2007. Second studio album to feature Rob Dukes on vocals and Lee Atlas on guitars. Also marks the second comeback of longtime original Exodus drummer Tom Hunting. With this album, the band shifted more towards an epic, progressive, technical form of thrash metal, while it retains the modern brutality of its predecessor, Shovel-Headed Kill Machine. It introduces significantly longer song structures and more complex arrangements. So, for example, several tracks exceed 8 minutes, and the title track crosses the 10-minute mark. The album has been described as a move away from compact thrashing aggression toward more drawn-out juggernaut riff assaults. Guitarists Gary Holt and Lee Atlas deliver a dense wall of sound with intricate, intertwining guitar work. Guitar riffs move into more technical territory. Rob Dukes continues his aggressive, venomous delivery, but introduces cleaner vocals for the first time on tracks like Children of a Worthless God, adding a new layer of melody to the band's sound. Tom Hunting has a machine-like and distinctive performance, lots of complex mid-tempo grooves together. The album was produced by Andy Sneap. The mix has a modern, cold, and robotic sound in a good way. Most popular song is Children of a Worthless God. This blends catchy, soaring melodies with brutal riffs. Funeral Hymn has an ominous atmospheric guitar intro and relentless juggernaut riffs, and continues for over 8 minutes. The album has a few tracks that retain their classic sound. For example, Riot Act is one of the high-speed thrashers on the album. It was released as a single and has a menacing vocal performance. It's a solid album from one of the best of their modern era. It's not a classic Exodus-sounding album, but they did something new and they did it right, and it doesn't take away from it. So that's why I have it ranked here, which is number 3. So this leaves me with the top 2, which is the debut Bonded by Blood and their third album, Fabulous Disaster. So I'm going to talk about both of them, and then I'll decide which one is number 1 and which one is number 2. So Bonded by Blood is the debut studio album released in 1985. So here's a fun fact. The album was completed in the summer of 84, but not released until 85 due to issues with Exodus and the label. The album is considered one of the most influential thrash metal albums of all time, and also the only full-length studio album of Exodus to feature Paul Bailoff on vocals, if you don't count the 82 demo and the 97 live album, Another Lesson in Violence. Now, why is this held in such high regard? For starters, every track is built on tightly written, memorable riffs from Gary Holt and Rick Hunold, with almost no filler across 9 songs. Songs like Bonded by Blood, A Lesson in Violence, Piranha, and Strike of the Beast, they have this perfect balance of catchiness and violence, making them instant live staples and scene anthems. Secondly, Paul Bailoff's unpolished, manic delivery gives the album an underground feel that you don't get from the more polished thrash records. In addition, the Mark Whitaker production is raw, loud, and somewhat unrefined, so as a result, it captures the band's live intensity rather than sounding like an overproduced metal album. Finally, lyrics are about violence, evil, and the metal scene, which has a reflection of that mid-80s underground metal. And then there's Fabulous Disaster, the third studio album released on January 30th, 1989, on UK label Music of Nations and Combat Relativity in the US. Also, Tom Hunting's last album until the 1997 live album, Another Lesson in Violence, and first Exodus album not to feature a lineup change after one consecutive studio album, and one of 2 albums to include 2 song covers, the other being 92's Force of Habit. I may be a little biased for this one because the album was my introduction to the band. I remember I went out, I bought the CD after watching the music video for The Toxic Waltz on MTV's Headbangers Ball. I like the variety on the album is Exodus at the creative peak. First time they started to experiment a little and go just beyond thrash metal. The album also has a big guitar tone and diverse songwriting, which makes it a thrash classic. There's a lot of variety. For example, The Toxic Waltz has a lot of mid-tempo grooves. Caged in Hell blends thrash with a swamp rock, and Like Father Like Son is an 8-minute epic with progressive bridges. The album also has more personality. There are intros like the spoken word opener and the frog croaks before Caged in Hell. There are great tracks like the title track and Corruption. They blend speed and power with hooks and solos and melody. And this album doesn't have any filler whatsoever. So I have come to a conclusion. I'm going to put Bonded by Blood at number 2 and Fabulous Disaster at number 1. I just think Fabulous Disaster is a little better given that they expanded their reach a little bit instead of just going for full thrash metal. If you want to check out my thoughts on Goliath, here's my full review. It should be appearing on your screen right now. In the meantime, thanks for watching. Please like this video. Helps me with the YouTube algorithm. Please subscribe if you're not already. I do rock and metal reviews and rankings and more. Thanks for watching. I will see you in the next one.